can we talk about the recent invasion of Ukraine? So you wrote on Facebook a pretty eloquent analysis. I think on March 3rd. Let me just read a small section of that just to give context, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about both Russia and the man Putin. You wrote, although the United States has many wars of aggression on its conscience, it doesn't justify Mr. Putin's aggression in Ukraine. A dozen wrongs don't make a right. Russia was wrong to invade. It has made too many mistakes. 1. Underestimating Ukraine resistance. 2. Overestimating the military ability to achieve its objective. 3. Underestimating Europe's reaction, especially Germany, upping its military contribution to NATO, which they've resisted for some 20 years. Even Switzerland has joined the cause. Russia will be more isolated than ever from the West. 4. Underestimating the enhanced power of NATO, which will now put more pressure on Russia's borders. 5. Probably putting Ukraine into NATO. 6. Underestimating the damage to its own economy and certainly creating more internal resistance in Russia. 7. Creating a major readjustment of power in its oligarch class. 8. Putting cluster and vacuum bombs into play. 9. And underestimating the power of social media worldwide. And you go on for a while giving a much broader picture of the history and the geopolitics of all of this. So now, a little bit later, 2 months later, what are your thoughts about the invasion of Ukraine?
Well, it's very hard to be honest in this regard because the West has brought down a curtain here, and anyone who questions the invasion of Ukraine and its consequences is an enemy of the people. It's become so difficult. I've never seen in my lifetime ever such a wall of propaganda as I've seen in the West. And that includes France, too, because I was there recently, and England. England is, of course, really vociferous. It's shocking to me how quickly Europe moved in this direction, and that includes Germany. I have German friends who expressed to me their shock over Ukraine. I have Italian friends, same thing. And Italy, of course, has been perhaps the most understanding and compassionate of countries. So it's quite evident that there's a united, and this attests to the power of the United States. And of course, you have Finland, and Finland, which has generally been reasonable, jumping in, talking about joining NATO, and Sweden too. Generally, there's been some more restraint in Europe. That's what surprised me the most. Europe, how quickly they fell into this NATO basket, which is very dangerous for Europe. Very dangerous. This goes back to my idea, what I was saying earlier about sovereignty. These countries don't really give me a sense that they have sovereignty over their own countries. They don't feel
the European nations.
I'm obviously intuition here is working. I just don't feel that they have freedom to say what they really think, and they're scared to say it. When the United States invaded Iraq in 2003, I remember with great, in a sense, satisfaction that at least France, Chirac, who I had not really known much about, stood up and said, the United States, we're not going to join you in this expedition, basically into madness. Schroeder in Germany, same thing. Of course, Putin condemned the invasion, and Putin had been an ally of the United States since 9/11, if you remember correctly.
Yes.
And had called Bush, and they were getting along. So even Putin said, "I won't go. No, don't go into Iraq. This is not the solution." He didn't oppose Afghanistan, but he opposed Iraq. So Chirac and Schroeder stood for the old Europe. I remember de Gaulle, Charles de Gaulle. He was independent of the United States. Charles de Gaulle pulled France out of NATO because he saw the dangers of NATO, which is to say, you have to fight an American war when they say. and they put nuclear weapons on your territory in England and France and Italy and Germany. When they do that, you're hitched to this superpower, and you have no say in what they're going to do. If they declare war and they use your territory, you're going to be involved in a major conflict. I'm talking about sovereignty. Where is that sovereignty? They don't have it. And that has influenced their mindset for years now, since 1940, since, de Gaulle was the 60s. He actually reversed the whole flow, and I think it was Sarkozy who put France back into NATO. And now it's Macron. I hope, because he was talking to Putin, would at least have an independent viewpoint that could be helpful here. But he rolled it up. He may have told Putin something else, but within days he had rolled it up and gone along with the United States position, which was enforced by the United States in a very fierce way. The propaganda, as I say, I don't know how much time you spent in America, but it was vicious, and everything was anti-Russian. Russia were killing all these people, were shooting down civilians. Although there was no proof of it, there was just, these are the accidents of war, but all of a sudden it was a campaign of criminality, and they were talking about bringing Putin into war crime trial. Well, why didn't they talk like that when Iraq was going on and Bush was killing far more people? Or for that matter, why were they not talking about the killings in Donbass and Lugansk during that 2014 to 2022 period? That is it's a crime. There were so many people that were killed, many of them innocent.
So what would be the way for Vladimir Putin to stop the killing in Donbass without the invasion of Ukraine?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I've asked that several times, and I have not talked to him since about 2 years now. It's a very good question.
What's the mistakes? What the human mistakes and the leadership mistakes made?
It's a very good question. You see, what the American press has not said, and the Western press has not said, is that on February 24, was it? That was on that day when they invaded. The day before, if you check the logs of the European organization that was supervising, was in the field in Ukraine. These are neutral observers. They were seeing heavier and heavier artillery fire going into Donbass from the Ukrainian side. So they had, apparently Ukraine had 110,000 troops on the border. They were about to invade Donbass. That was the plan. That's what I think. Russia, because of the buildup on the border of Donbass, brought 130,000 troops to the area near Donbass, right? So you have buildup of forces on both sides, but you wouldn't know that from reading the press in the West. You'd believe that the Russians suddenly put all these men into the situation with the idea of invading Ukraine, not only Donbass, but invading all of Ukraine and getting rid of decapitating the government there, which is all assumption. We don't know what they would intend it to do.
But you, at the time, as did a lot of people, thought that all the talk of the Russian invasion of Ukraine is just propaganda. It's not going to happen. It's very unlikely to happen.
I think many of us thought that the United States is building this up into an invasion. In other words, that is the nature of false flag operations. When you create this propaganda, they are going to invade, and then when they invaded, the United States was completely ready, and all their allies were completely ready for the invasion. Correct. So why did Putin do that? He fell theoretically into this trap set by the United States. That here you're telling all your allies across the board they're going to invade, but
Why do you think he did it? So here, is it madness or is it
no, it's not madness.
Strategic calculation?
Perhaps. This one I cannot answer you faithfully because, first of all, we don't know what he was told. If he was indeed getting the right intelligence estimates, from what I said earlier in that essay I wrote, you would think he was not well informed, perhaps, about the degree of cooperation he would get from the Ukrainian Russians in Ukraine. That would be one factor, that he wasn't he didn't assess the operation correctly. Remember this: Mr. Putin has had this cancer, and I think he's licked it, but he's also been isolated because of COVID. And some people would argue that the isolation from normal activity, which he was meeting people face to face, but all of a sudden he was meeting people across the table 100 yards away or whatever, 10 yards away. It was very hard to, perhaps he lost touch with contact with people.
So it's not just power, it's the very simple fact that you're just distant.
As I say, I'm
from
speculating.
humans.
I don't know. I see that. And I also, perhaps he thought in his mind that there would be a faster resolution, that the Ukrainian, because the evidence had been that the Ukrainian the Ukrainian army had folded so many times and that they were only backed up and they were stiffened by the resistance of the Nazi-oriented Azov battalions. That was a factor, of course. And that is a big factor for the Russians because these people are very tough. They rush. See, what people don't understand is that Ukraine, since 2014, has been a terror state. They've been run. Anytime a Ukrainian has expressed any understanding of the Russian-Ukrainian position, they've been threatened by the state. From 2014 to 2022, there's been a set of hideous murders that people don't even know about in the West. Journalists, people who speak out, liberals, people who I interviewed Viktor Medvedev, who they make out to be some kind of horrible person, but Medvedev was a very important figure in the administration of Kuchma, the first Ukrainian prime minister in the 1990s, and he did a great job on the economy. He was a very thoughtful man. And if you'll see my interview, it's called Ukraine Revealed. Mm-hmm. He's very thoughtful about the future of Ukraine. He doesn't want to go back and join Russia. He wants it to be an independent country. Ukraine is independent, and he wants it to be a functioning economic democracy, more or less a democracy, if you can get that, but that exists in a neutral state, which Ukraine used to be before 2014. It was neutral from 1991 to 2014. Neutral, very important. Under Poroshenko, it just immediately went into an anti-Soviet Cold War position as an ally of the United States. And my point was that it was a very dangerous place, Ukraine. People were being killed. Death squads were out there. Medvedev, they stripped him of his television stations very suddenly. This is Zelensky, the new president, said Zelensky was elected on a peace platform. Remember that 70% of the country was for him to make peace with Russia. Did he ever even try to make peace with Russia? Did he attend any of the Minsk II agreements? Did he visit? Did he pay any attention to Putin? Did he go to Russia? No, not at all. The moment he got into office, I'm convinced that the militant sector of the right sector parties of Ukraine let him know that you will not make a deal with Russia. There'll be no concessions to Russia. This is very dangerous. This is where this attitude that's very, very hostile to Russia has hurt us. The whole world is being hurt by this. And no one calls them out. No one calls them out. Zelensky backed off from his platform as running for president, and as president has been ineffective, did nothing to promote it. On the contrary, went the other way and seemed to support the Ukrainian aggression.
Well, he found his support in this war. You've revealed through your work some of the most honest and dark aspects of war.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, this is a war, and there's a humanitarian crisis. Millions of people refugees escaping Ukraine. What do you think about the human cost of this war initiated by
it's horrible.
Whoever, just as you write, whatever the context, whatever NATO, whatever pressure, as you wrote, Russia was wrong to invade.
Okay, yeah. Let's get back to the original question. You said, what was he thinking at that time? We never answered that.
Yeah.
Now, by the way, among those people who've been ruined by this war, you have to include the 2014 to 2022 Ukrainian Russians. 14,000 were killed, not necessarily by some of them by maybe accident and this and that, but certainly a large number of that is responsible to the Ukrainian military and the Nazi-related battalions who have done a good job of death squadding that whole area. And remember, I did a film about Salvador. I know a little bit about death squads and how they work, and I know about paramilitaries because in South America, they're all over the place. America hates Venezuela, goes on about Venezuela. But do they tell you anything about Colombia, its next door neighbor? Colombia for years has been plagued by paramilitaries that are right wing. And the United States has said nothing about them, except occasionally there's a newspaper report now. So this support of death squads by the United States is all over the world. It's not just in South America and Central America where we see plenty of evidence of it. It's here too. And this is what's horrible about this whole thing, this hypocrisy of America, that they can support such evil. Now, going back to your larger question about, yes, it's a terrible refugee disaster. But again, we have to get the numbers. Let's get the numbers and get evidence, because I would ask you, I'm not sure at this point whether more civilians were killed before 2022 in Donbass than have been killed in this latest.
So we can't talk about we can't talk about the invasion of Ukraine without considering the full war between Russia and Ukraine since 2014.
That's correct. Absolutely. And take the toll on both sides. And I mean, you might be surprised by the result. I think the Russian military, of course, I'm not there, and this is speculation. The Russian military has slowed down, and part of that reason is not to keep the civilian corridors open. And I think the Ukrainian military has made it more difficult on purpose, especially some of these battalions that are death squad battalions have gone out of their way to keep the civilians locked into these cities in danger, because it's in their interest to do so. So there's no reason why Ukrainian military, who have killed Ukrainian civilians for years, would change their policies. They would have no compunctions about wiping out, for example, people with white armbands in Bucha. Okay. As to what Putin was thinking at the time, I wondered this, and I still do. I said, okay, so Putin can say, let's say the Ukrainian government wants to now invade Donbass. This is on February 23, and they have artillery. They're peppering the whole place. They're going to go in, and they're going to get Donbass back. What do you do? And you have Russian separatists who are Russian Ukrainians who are going to fight. How far do you go in supporting them? Can Russia at this point say, well, we can't help you. You have to get along. You have to be absorbed by the Kiev. You're going to be absorbed by them, and they're not going to give you autonomy, and you have to live with them. And there's going to be a price to pay. You could do that, and you can also say, well, we open our borders to Donbass. You can come into our country, you can leave, and we will help you to resettle. And that would be a reasonable approach. So you take it to the next stage, as Putin's thinking. You take it to the next stage. You stall. It's harder for your people. Of course, there's this pressure on Putin from inside his own government to say, what are you going to do? I mean, you can't do this. There's a lot of nationalists in Russia. They would certainly it would be they'd say Putin is weak. And that's the biggest rap you can ever give a Russian leader, is you're weak. You can't get anything done. So there would have been some damage. But let's say he goes with that and he says, okay, we know what the United States intention is. It's to get rid of me, regime change, and to get another Yeltsin in. That's what they want. And they will go to any ends. They will destroy Ukraine if necessary, but they want regime change in Russia. And then after they do that, of course, they'll go after China. But that's the ultimate policy of the United States. This is a country that has no compunctions about going all the way. And it will use hypocrisy and all the news propaganda in the world to get what it wants. This is the equivalent, frankly, of Germany's goals in World War II, world domination. There's no question in my mind, but we're going about it in our way as opposed to Hitler's way. So just to finish your thought, where do they go? What's stage two? Okay, let's say Ukraine takes back Donbass. Let's say people get killed in large quantities. So we now to the next stage. We're finished with the Minsk II agreements that were never adhered to. So what does Russia do? They wait for the next aggression, which is going to come in one form or another, perhaps in Georgia. I don't know what would happen, what the U.S. is thinking. But the U.S. cannot say, Russia has done anything. They have not used violence to stop Donbass from belonging back to Ukraine, right? So you're in a new setup now. It's a whole thing rearranges. Now you have, but you still have nuclear weapons. And you still have Russian nuclear weapons, and they're serious weapons. They're very well developed, crude, but not as refined as the American nuclear force, but powerful. That becomes another game. Then you open another chessboard, and no, you still haven't been condemned. The sanctions haven't been imposed. It's a new game. Could he have lived with that? That's the question I ask myself.
So you see ultimately Ukraine today as a battleground for the proxy war between Russia and the United States.
The United States would have then NATOized Ukraine, or certainly put more weapons. And, the United States has already done a lot in Ukraine with intelligence, with training advisors. The intelligence aspect of the Ukrainian army has been raised enormously by the United States contribution.